I'm going to start with an overview of some of the key trends on our radar across the publishing industry, and then I'll talk about some of the ways that those are likely to affect you as creative professionals working in the field. If you're not familiar with O'Reilly Media, and I'm sure most of you are, we're best known, of course, as the publisher of the iconic animal books on computer software and technology with funny-looking animals on the covers. In addition to books, we also run more than a dozen conferences each year, mostly in the Bay Area and mostly about technology. But we also produce the Tools of Change for Publishing conference every February in New York, as well as a smaller version in Frankfurt during the Frankfurt Book Fair. This is a quote from science fiction writer William Gibson, and it's a great way to describe what we do at O'Reilly. There's a lot that we try to learn not by guessing what might happen, but trying harder to interpret what's already happening. And that's what I'm going to talk about today in terms of some of the things that are on our radar and are keeping us excited about what's on the horizon for the publishing industry. A lot of what I'll talk about this evening relates to technology, and it's important to remember that what you see on the screen is also very much a technology. Books are devices for sharing ideas, and their development over time isn't much different from how most technologies develop. These are just a few of the features that have been added to those devices over time, and are a reminder that books did not always look the way they have during our lifetimes, just as they will not always look or act the way they do now. For most of the history of books, to publish actually meant to read aloud in public. And for most of the history of the written word, reading was a very social activity. Our modern habit of private, silent reading would seem very strange to a visitor from 3 centuries ago. You can see echoes of that social past watching someone's lips move while they read a book on the train. For example, consider that word spacing developed over 300 years, starting in around 1100, as an example of some publishing innovations. Or consider another great innovation in Western publishing, punctuation. The hyphen first appeared in 11th century Europe and took another 200 years to reach England. The colon first appeared in the late 14th century. The written word is one of the most powerful technologies humans have created. And like any technology, it changes and evolves and is subject sometimes to rather disruptive changes. This is one of the original early warning systems. This little guy isn't in a coal mine, fortunately, but a few of his ancestors probably were. And I'm sure they'd agree that what was a faint signal to the miners was anything but faint to the canaries. Much of what I talk about today is based on our experience as a publishing company, and one that sees itself as having more than a little bit in common with those canaries. It's easy to dismiss a lot of our experiences at O'Reilly to the subject matter of our books or the technical nature of our audience, but we do believe that we are very much like a canary in a coal mine. First, the bad news from that birdcage. This is Nielsen BookScan point-of-sale data for the entire U.S. retail computer book market, not just O'Reilly. This data goes back to 2007. If it went back further, you'd see that sales in our part of the market, as measured using printed books sold at retail, has been flat or declining for nearly a decade, and doesn't look to be getting better anytime soon. But there is good news on the digital side, including statistics like these from the International Digital Publishing Forum, which suggest that we are nowhere near satisfying the existing demand, much less the constantly growing demand, for digital books and other digital media. Here's a more direct comparison showing print versus e-book revenue for O'Reilly since early 2008. You can see from the red line showing e-book sales that they now outsell print books on O'Reilly.com by well more than 5 to 1. In fact, for 23 of the 25 top sellers from O'Reilly.com in a recent month, ebooks were more than 90% of total sales. And with a full quarter left in the year, we're already well ahead of last year's full year total for ebook sales. While downloadable ebooks are performing very well for us, they are just a small piece of where much of the opportunity lies for new ways of doing the job that books have long done so well, to transmit ideas. It's doubtful that this man has a laptop or an e-reader, much less much of a bookshelf at home. But like millions of people around the world coming online, he has a mobile phone, and one that is probably connected to the web. According to IBM research, there will be 1 billion web-enabled cell phones by next year. And in India, cell phones already outnumber PCs more than 10 to 1. According to the One Laptop Per Child project, 97% of adolescents alive today live in the developing world. More than half of India's population is under the age of 25. And in the same way that many emerging markets skipped landline telephones altogether, it's quite likely they'll skip building out a costly and often inefficient retail distribution system in favor of something natively digital and very much mobile-friendly. By 2011, some forecasts, such as this one reported in The Economist, show that mobile broadband will surpass fixed broadband as the primary way that people access the Internet. At the Web 2.0 Summit late last year, Morgan Stanley Managing Director Mary Meeker did a forecast of Internet trends and made a startling case for mobile as the next big computing stage. And when I talk about computing stages, thinking about things like mainframes, then mini-computers, then PCs, and then the web, and now mobile. This is a slide from her deck. If you thought the web took off fast, compare the adoption rate for AOL and Netscape with the iPhone and iPod Touch. And one more from Mary, showing that each of these new stages reaches 10 times the number of people as the previous one. The future is here. It's just not evenly distributed yet. Sales data for our books show that these are not merely substitution sales. These are often new customers who would not otherwise purchase the print book, as well as customers who are purchasing both print and digital versions. We've seen a similar trend with Safari Books Online, our joint venture subscription service, founded with Pearson about 10 years ago. And we have nearly a decade of data to look at. The print market is in terrible shape, but Safari has been growing 40% year on year. And these are additive sales. Our sales volume in the print market relative to other publishers has actually steadily increased since Safari launched. And at O'Reilly, we're moving very quickly into mobile publishing, in particular on the iPhone, though we also have several hundred apps available in the Android market as well. Here's one of our pages from iTunes, where we have nearly 1,000 apps in the App Store, with more to come in the weeks and months ahead. Our ability to rapidly respond to new market opportunities like the App Store, Kindle, and Android markets is a result of a publishing and production tool chain that explicitly separates content from formatting and design. Most of the books that we publish are produced using DocBook XML as the source. The same principles that drive web design practices, separating content from formatting using style sheets, are at the heart of our production system. Formatting is output specific, in our case primarily print PDF, web PDF, and the open EPUB ebook standard. The content is transformed using a set of style sheets built on top of the open source DocBook XSL style sheets, which we've customized to match our design and branding needs. This is a high-level look at our XML multi-channel publishing workflow. For the majority of our books, all of our print and digital output come from that same XML source file. It's constructed very much like a software build process, with different components pulled in for different outputs at assembly time. For example, we've begun preparing both color and grayscale versions of illustrations. After all, why wouldn't you want to use color for a digital platform like the iPhone, or for a PDF you know most people will read on their laptops? Here's just a little bit more detail on the components we use. Nearly all of these are customized versions of off-the-shelf and mostly free open source components. The rest of our titles are produced using Adobe InDesign. And we've spent quite a bit of time reworking and revising our InDesign templates so that we can export high-quality EPUB from the InDesign source files. Many of you know that InDesign includes an EPUB export now, but any of you that have actually tried to use it know that it's nowhere near as simple or reliable as a push-button Save As option. Beyond the extensive work within InDesign itself, we do a variety of post-processing on the EPUB to clean up the export prior to publication. What you see on the screen here is a side-by-side look at the print and EPUB versions of a recent title, both produced using the same InDesign source files. That kind of flexible production and publishing toolchain has opened up new ways to exploit the inherent connectivity of the web. We're now including readers right at the point of content creation, giving them the opportunity to become writers and collaborators, not just readers. A few years ago, some developers who were working on a book about Django, an open source framework for building complex websites, used their own software to build a system to solicit feedback on their book as it was being written. See those little bubbles next to each paragraph? Those show how many comments were made on each paragraph. This is another book, one that we published, about a very obscure programming language that has nowhere near the user base of something like HTML or Java or any other language that you might have actually heard of. Here's a screenshot from that book's website, which was also custom built by the authors. Again, they didn't just write a book and then post it online. They updated the book as it was being written. And again, as you can see from the links here, they asked for and got feedback on nearly every paragraph in the entire book. Clicking on one of those comment links pulled up a dialogue like this one, familiar to anyone who's commented on a blog post. Every single paragraph in the entire book. Here's a few stats from the authors about the feedback they received. Note that most of the people who commented left their name so they could be acknowledged in the book. We printed their names in the preface. You can also see that 21 people left more than 75 comments each. 75 comments is as good or better than the level of comments and feedback that we get from paid technical reviewers. And typically we only have 2 or 3 of those for a book. So this book got 10 times the level of deep review as most of our books for free, and is a better book because of it. People want desperately to contribute, to collaborate, and to be part of a community. And publishers that help provide the context for that community will be rewarded. As I said earlier, for most of the history of the printed word, reading has been an intensely social and public activity, and the web is bringing us back to those roots and extending that social nature to the writing process. We liked what the authors of that book did so much that we've built our own similar open feedback system for use with other books. Again, the underlying content is in XML. It's managed in a version control repository similar to what many developers are already familiar with using. And while the book is still being written, we can export PDF and EPUB for delivery as ebooks, with customers receiving updates to the content throughout the writing and review process. There have now been well over a dozen titles built using this open feedback system, with hundreds of comments coming through on each. Those of you who have made the transition from print, design, and production to the web know that designing for the web means giving up a lot of the control that we've grown accustomed to in print. From browser differences to the variety of screen sizes and resolutions to the flexible customizations possible for readers, web design is a distinct discipline with its own priorities and best practices. The same kind of shift is now happening as we move to a primarily mobile web experience. Few sites can, will, or should look and behave exactly the same on all mobile devices. And at the same time, devices like the iPad are creating an entirely new category of UI, bringing with it new sets of challenges and expectations. Here's the way that we're starting to look at the entire process of publishing. These are no longer print books that we happen to also sell digitally. They are digital books that we might also sell in print. My colleague Joe Weichert said it very well when comparing the current state of digital books to the transitional period of another popular medium, television. The first TV shows were basically radio programs on the television, until someone realized TV was a whole new medium. E-books should not just be print books delivered electronically. And the same, of course, has been true of other media. Many of the first films merely recorded plays performed on a stage. It took time for those working in the new medium to understand there were entirely new characteristics that set it apart from theatrical performances. Multiple cameras, lighting and staging, special effects, these all evolved within the changing medium. Early efforts typically try merely to replicate the prior format within the new medium. I heard quite a bit of buzz when it came out about the Popular Science iPad app, what was called a reimagining of the magazine for the iPad, for the low price of $4.99 per issue. While it is slick, the problem is that it is a reimagining of the magazine. When someone is using an application or content or other material on their iPad and on a mobile device in general, they expect it to behave like everything else they're using on the device. For example, here's a full-page ad, which is a little hard to understand on an iPad, with a URL in it, and the URL isn't even an actual hyperlink. I pressed and pressed at this URL, and nothing would take me to the website shown. And this happened over and over again throughout this magazine. I saw something I expected to be able to click, often URLs, and nothing happened. This page is some typical pop-sci gadget porn, where not only can I not click on the gadgets to get more info or maybe even comparison shop, but even the company URLs aren't clickable. This app is chock full of the exact same copy and images from the magazine, presented through a 7:9 window and without any of the affordances of a print magazine to help readers understand their place in the overall picture. Working hyperlinks are the very least we should expect from content like this on a device like the iPad. And they're the bare minimum form of something notably absent in this popular science app: opportunity for engagement. There are no comment links, no way to see what the most popular content is, no way to email a picture or an article to someone else, and no place to submit my own recommendations for better tools, or even just to tweet about what I just read. But my favorite example of the disconnect between what popular science intended and what they delivered is summarized succinctly in this introduction from the editor, who says, "Everything in the issue and reimagines it to make the most of the iPad's screen and capabilities. Can judge for yourself whether this is really making the most of that screen." It can be fun, if a little exhausting, to swipe and pinch and dig around to find the content in the app as it's presented, but this was clearly intended as a better or new or different version of the magazine itself, and so it suffers the fatal flaw of having to carry a ton of the baggage of the old medium into the new one. So how do you navigate the intersection of design, content, and the proliferation of mobile devices and expectations around those devices? It's really important to remember that no customer thinks like this. Nobody wakes up in the morning and says, "Gosh, I better remember to pick up some content on the way home from the office." People don't buy products. They hire them. They hire products and services to do a job for them, to solve their problem. The challenge we face now is that many of the jobs that were previously best done by books, magazines, newspapers, and other printed material are simply more efficiently and effectively done by emerging digital and mobile products. That doesn't mean text is irrelevant anymore. In fact, quite the opposite. Text works. Think about all those Twitter updates, Facebook status messages, and emails that we read each day. It's all mostly text, but it's text that behaves like the web it's a part of. Even Craigslist, that boogeyman of newspaper executives everywhere, is almost entirely text. A classified ad in Craigslist isn't that much different from what you'd find in a newspaper. It was the distribution system, the ease of access, and the social context of the web that made the difference, not the underlying form of the content. We're starting to experiment with modifying our own delivery formats to adapt to the mobile web, without actually tinkering that much with the underlying form of the content itself. This format, the pocket reference, was popular for us for many years, but has struggled recently among new competition from the web in general and the mobile web in particular. We want to find out if mobile delivery is a more efficient and effective way of doing the same job that this little book did for a long time. The author, Jen Robbins, worked with one of our editors, who's also a programmer, to rebuild the content for delivery as an HTML5 web app. Here's how it looks on my iPad. The actual content here is pretty much the same as what we'd put in the book, but it's organized and optimized for delivery and consumption digitally, with search and navigation features that simply aren't possible with dead trees. But other designers and developers are pushing the envelope even further. Here's another HTML5-based site that takes a radical and very interesting approach to presenting that same kind of information. Tim O'Reilly is fond of saying that books are user interfaces on information. And here's an example of someone playing with creative ways to improve on that interface. Again, you press one of the element names and a small snippet of text comes up describing that element. A common critique of ebooks and the EPUB format is that you can't do intricate or attractive design. And that's simply not true. The dirty secret is that most publishers simply don't understand the format because they're either throwing print designers at it or outsourcing full production of their ebooks to an offshore vendor. EPUB is HTML and CSS, which means it offers many of the same design capabilities web designers are already very familiar with. This is from a site called EPUB Zen Garden, which shows how you can swap out style sheets to achieve interesting design effects for the same underlying EPUB content. Here's the same material with a different style sheet applied. And yet another one that's not the most readable, but a great example of what's possible. Extending the web skills toolbox even further, it's actually possible to build rich and robust iPhone, Android, and BlackBerry apps using the same skills many of you are probably already familiar with: HTML, CSS, and some JavaScript. If you're interested in learning more, here's a fantastic book that we published last year that shows how to do just that. And here's two more titles that are well worth a look. These are available as print or as ebooks, and both offer a lot of insight into what it takes to design and build for mobile apps and the mobile web. The title on the right was actually written and reviewed using that open feedback system that I mentioned earlier. There is no doubt that this is a challenging time to work in media and publishing, and there's more to digest and interpret than ever before. But it's worth keeping in mind that if the World Wide Web were a person, it would barely be old enough to have voted in the last U.S. elections. On the other hand, in about 30 years, no one under the age of 55 will remember a world without the web. We are just at the beginning of a transformation that's as important as Gutenberg's printing press was 500 years ago. There's enormous challenges, to be sure, but there's also extraordinary opportunities for those willing to take risks and do what Alan Kay suggests here. Thank you very much. I hope that you can join us at the next Tools of Change for Publishing conference in New York in February. And I wanted to make sure to leave some time for questions. I know we had a bit of a late start, so I'm happy to take questions from the audience.
Okay, this is Spike, and I'm supposed to be moderating the questions, and I'll start, and then we'll have. So I guess the power of the press belongs to those who own one, and since I'm controlling the speakerphone, I get to do that. You talked about the enhancements that you're going to be adding to digital books, where the links or the Twitter feeds within the books and so on. I guess I've been defining that as enhanced ebooks. I don't know if that's a good definition for it with my limited background, but I'm curious about what O'Reilly might be doing in that area as far as, I'm thinking of, Photoshop, CS5, the missing manual. Are you going to be having, besides the open feedback, what kind of enhancements will you be adding to your books to take that interface of the book and use the new medium?
Sure, that's a great question. I will say that some of the kind of things I'm talking about are not necessarily inherent in the books themselves. A lot of the things like the social aspect, the ability to quickly annotate and share what you're reading, the ability to follow hyperlinks both within and outside of the book and onto the web. Those are things that we're starting to see built into the reading devices and reading software and reading apps that people are using. And the challenge for publishers is to make sure that they're recognizing, again, that these aren't just books delivered electronically, but that they're books consumed and read and used in the context of devices that are always connected to the web. And so they need to behave like the web that they're a part of. What we've seen so far is that while there is certainly some interest, and we're working on things like trying video embedded within books and other items like that, we also find that there really doesn't appear to be as much interest or demand from the market as there is from publishers, who seem in some ways more interested than their readers in what they're calling enhanced ebooks. There's still a lot of value in the textual long-form narrative in the way that it's been presented in a lot of our books. We would certainly see an erosion in interest and consumption of our reference titles, which are really just, in many ways, printouts of a database in some respects, where it's a list of commands or functions or features that really is better served through even something as simple as a Google search. But a guided, well-crafted, well-edited material like those missing manuals, still clearly has a lot of value, and it's our goal as a publisher to make sure that is both available and very useful in these emerging digital markets and when read on those digital devices. So I don't think you'll see a lot of whiz-bang kind of fancy graphics and video embedded within the titles themselves, but what we're going to be sure to do is try to make sure that this material is as useful as it can be when consumed in the context of those devices. Okay.
We have a question. You might want to come up here and speak into the speakerphone, or you want to, I'll repeat it. The question was, can you focus on the socioeconomic groups that are in other words, is it college-age kids? Is it the industrialized countries, non-industrialized countries? So I guess the markets for the e-books, is it college kids?
Sure.
Developing countries? What I guess maybe demographics might be what she's asking about.
Sure. That's an excellent question. And, of course, I can speak with the most experience about our sales, and this may not necessarily apply to other types of publishers, other types of content. But what we find is about 65% of the people who purchase our digital books, whether those are e-books or the mobile app versions, are outside the U.S. And in fact, it tends to be rather than any individual country being a significant number of sales, it's those sales distributed in nearly every country around the world. And I think part of that is because in the technology and business space, English is really the typical second language. So if you're a software developer in Eastern Europe or in Southeast Asia or in South America, you're familiar with and are comfortable with English as the programming language and the documentation about that language. So what we tend to find is the type of people buying, consuming our digital products are very similar in terms of being working technology professionals or aspiring technology amateurs, whether it's students or young entrepreneurs. Just that those are people who are living in places where it was often very, very difficult to get our books previously. For example, we hear stories about students in Australia who would be assigned one of our books for as a textbook for their class, and 2 or 3 of them would pitch in together to order one of the books because it was so expensive to ship from the States. And so what we're seeing is it's not necessarily that we're reaching different types of people. We're just reaching them in places where we could never before previously economically market to them. So it's for us an expansion of the potential audience geographically, more so than a change in the demographic characteristics of that audience.
Okay, here's a question from the online questions. It's from David Blakesley. I wonder what Andrew thinks about the wired issues for the iPad.
Sure, that's a great question.
I want to tell people in the audience or people maybe who haven't seen it what that app is or that book is like.
Sure. That's a great question. I haven't spent a lot of time with it. Again, my experience with the magazine style apps is that they tend to be derivatives of the same. The magazine is a particular user interface, and it's a particular set of affordances, and it works very well as that is attempted to be sort of shoved onto the iPad. I see that it seems to be missing the mark. The way I like to think about it is this comes up quite a bit in the context of textbooks, for example. There was an interesting and quite energetic conversation on an email list that I'm a part of about textbooks and the iPhone, and what was the best way to get textbooks on the iPhone. And the conversation devolved into all of the challenges of trying to take PDF pages that were built for the large size of a textbook, and how do you put that onto an iPhone. And for me, the textbook is the format of the textbook is not the end itself. It's the means to that end, and the end is doing the job of educating a student. When you look at a device like the iPhone or the iPad, this is a device that can see, that can hear, that can talk, that responds to touch, that knows where it is in the world, that can shoot video, that has an always-on network connection. And it's a much more interesting problem to me to think about how do you do the same job of educating a student using a device with capabilities like that, rather than what are the best ways to take what we used to do and put it on the new device. Again, it's very, very early in this kind of transition. But I, so far, have been disappointed with the efforts of magazine publishers to take what they're already doing and put it onto devices like the iPad.
Okay, is there another question from the audience? Judith, you want to?
Quickly, what is O'Reilly doing to work with colleges and higher education in terms of encouraging professors to use e-books?
I don't know. Did you hear the question, Andrew? Could you?
I did. The question was, what were we doing with colleges and schools?
Yeah.
Well, I should be clear that we're not really a textbook publisher. We certainly do get textbook adoptions, and our titles often show up on supplementary or recommended additional reading for university courses. But we are really not very. We don't have a large presence in the traditional higher ed market. That said, we hear from a lot of instructors and a lot of students who really value the variety of multiple formats that we offer. It makes it very easy to quickly move around from different devices. People really like the fact that they can have 5, 10, 15 of our books with them wherever they are. It makes it very easy to quickly search and scan and find that material. And of course, our subscription product, Safari Books Online, is very, very popular among libraries and universities. For example, Northeastern here in Boston, many times you're on campus and you're on their Wi-Fi network, you have full access to Safari Books Online, which is 12,000 books and videos encompassing technology, business, graphic design, creative, professional material. And so I think there's a lot of ways to approach it, but that's been our approach so far is to try and make our material available, affordable, and convenient, and that's serving us well.
Here's an online question from Andy Lester. When any given subject matter expert can create an e-book for distribution instantly, what role and value will publishers like O'Reilly bring to the process?
That's an excellent question, Andy. And that's a very common concern that comes up. I mean, you regularly hear about, just recently there was a story about Seth Godin, who's really chosen to go it alone. Doug Rushkoff, who's speaking at our event in Frankfurt next week, did pretty much the same thing with his last book. I think it's important to remember that the hard part of publishing hasn't been the act of making and distributing a book for a long time. Even before this explosion in ebooks, pretty much anyone with a PDF could get their title into Amazon and available, effectively worldwide without much effort at all. The challenge isn't making the book or making it available for sale. The challenge is getting people to buy it. And I think that's where publishers still have a lot of opportunity to provide certain types of value. For example, I've spent much of the last 18 to 24 months negotiating relationships with, nearly 36 ebook resellers and wholesalers and distributors. It's one thing to place your title in the Kindle, for example, but it's quite another to find a way to make sure that it's available on the iPad and in the Nook and in Kobo and in ebooks.com. And in, again, any of the dozens of existing channels, much less the constantly growing ones. And then, you're dealing with an enormous discoverability issue where it can be very, very difficult to stand out among the crowd. And so what we're start to see is that people tend to look for. In our case, we have the fortune of a well-known and well-respected brand that helps people identify and use as a signal of the quality of the material. It's not to say that there aren't going to be authors or individuals or certain types of people who are better off and will be happier going without a traditional publisher. And that's certainly not to say that traditional publishers don't need to significantly reassess and reevaluate how they're structured and how they do the jobs they've always done. But I really feel like in a world that on the one hand, this is we're getting to the world where we want it to be cheap and easy and fast and quick for people to publish something, to say what they want or need to say, and that doesn't need to be dependent on large amounts of money or capital or influence anymore. But that creates a problem of how do you deal with that information overload, and that role of filtering of aggregating readers with writers is something that publishers have long done and that publishers can continue to do and do it effectively. And a big part of that, again, is doing the hard stuff, dealing with distribution and dealing with marketing and dealing with promotions and dealing with royalty statements and dealing with the kind of negotiations that need to happen to get into a lot of these emerging channels.
Okay, we have a question from the local audience here. He's actually walking up to the microphone.
It's a kind of common question because it's kind of hard to articulate, but I wanted to compliment you on the XML style where you allow the comments, because I could see a great future in books and actually, evolving the whole reading experience that way. Take, for example, when someone gets ill, one of the first things they do is get on the internet and find out all they can about what they're experiencing. And you take a book like about cancer, for example, and then you have people allowed to comment on that, and you have experiences with denial and with support issues and things like that. That would be a very valuable tool for those people to reinforce their experience and to progress from that in an advanced way. Now, when WebMD first came out, it was like a first-grade primer because they were afraid.
Do you have a question? You should try to phase that as a question. I think that would move things along a
okay,
little bit.
Well, right along the same lines, though, is scope creep. Okay, so how do you when you have these comments in the book, then they kind of detract from the storyline.
So you want, I guess that says the interactivity is probably what he's asking about there, Andrew.
Sure, and I think that's a very important point. On the one hand, for us, sorry. In that kind of scenario, we certainly rely heavily on the authors and editors to continue playing the role of moderating and sort of managing that conversation and guiding it toward making the book a better experience. On the other hand, the comments are there for people to participate with if they want to, but of course we offer the material in a couple of different formats without that commenting, and I think that you see that as much as there is, again, enthusiasm for a lot of the sort of bells and whistles and various widgets and these things, that people still appreciate for a certain type of content, something of a more immersive reading experience, and you see that even on the web with Safari, the latest Apple Safari browser with that reader button that sort of extracts the main body of the page and puts it into a sort of a unadorned window, or the rise of apps and services like Instapaper that allow you to sort of put aside just the important core of the text for reading and considering later, sort of away from the distraction of all of the blinking lights and other places to go. I think the fundamental answer is that it's important to give people options, and I think that's one of the great things is that you've got a situation where if one person wants to just read what is the absolute latest without any additional material, no additional social interaction, they want to be on their own and quietly consume, whereas someone else is really interested in seeing not only what the comments have been, but watching how the material has evolved over time, comparing multiple versions to each other for whatever reason, and we can give them that option too. And I think that's the answer there, is to just try to provide the options and let the readers choose for themselves.
Okay, here's a question. Thank you very much. Here's a question online from Michael Pastor. I'm wondering why it has been so difficult to make a push-button EPUB maker. Not even InDesign or Apple's Pages can create an EPUB that passes validation, which I think I know what validation is, but you might want to explain that too, please, for the audience.
Sure. The validation just sort of means that there are a set of rules for assembling an EPUB file. In the same way, you might have a set of rules or a sort of a checklist for packing your suitcase, and it's just sort of software making sure that you have all the items that you said you were going to have in the place you said you were going to have them. I think part of that is because applications like InDesign and Pages, to a lesser extent, were designed to build print PDF, to build print output. And so a lot of what you can do within those programs is intended to adjust how something looks on a printed page, and specifically translate it into the expression language of PDF, which is really describing the position of text and objects on a printed page, and doesn't contain the kind of information that's needed to, for example, adjust the size of text or how to reflow a paragraph. And so I think a big part of it is that this sort of EPUB export and support is sort of bolted on after the fact. I think we can all remember what those first, whenever you'd see someone whose website or web page was done by saving as from Microsoft Word, sort of a similar kind of experience. I certainly expect that what we'll see is an evolution in tools. I think the Pages is better than InDesign did. It's still, of course, not perfect. And I think as people understand this opportunity to that there's going to be a significant increase in demand for tools that can produce EPUB, you'll start to see an evolution. I would actually expect to see it, tools evolving from those used for writing for the web now. I mean, there's a rich ecosystem of online and offline blogging environments that are already most of the way toward doing the same kind of markup and dealing with the same kind of content that you would find in EPUB. It is certainly unfortunate that there really isn't anything out there yet that can do it as easily as it should be done, but I think that will change relatively quickly.
I know here in Cleveland, the local Adobe InDesign user group is going to be talking about EPUBs with InDesign at one of their future meetings, and I'm hoping the WebSig coordinator who's here at our topic tonight might be doing that also for one of his programs.
Well, and it's the same way that I think a lot of us remember from the early days of the web using, whether it was BB Edit or Notepad or other text editors, and really spending a lot of time, dealing with raw HTML tags, and then tools started to come and evolve. The EPUB standard is not even 3 years 3 years old, and is still under pretty significant development. So it's still pretty early on, and unfortunately, I think it's not ideal, but will just take a little more time.
Here's a question from me, and this has to do with advertising. I know Apple has their iAds, and there's the battle between Apple and Google. And are we going to start seeing? We see ads everywhere at the supermarket and all that. Are we going to start seeing advertisements in books, and what kind of things might be happening with location and mobile devices for things like that?
That's a really good question, Spike. And I don't doubt that there will be people who try advertising within books. I know that Amazon has a patent of some kind on that, and it wouldn't surprise me if they introduced some method of incorporating advertising. But something that we certainly learned the hard way with the economics of the web were that in order to succeed with an advertising model on the web, and I would argue that digital books have more in common with the web in that sense than with their print counterparts, is that you really need to either be the kind of site that can attract enormous numbers of eyeballs. That's a Yahoo sort of scale of site, where even though the actual cost per advertisement that someone is paying may be very, very small, the sheer number of impressions you're delivering means that it's a multi-billion-dollar kind of business. Or you need to have the kind of niche content that is very, very appealing to a small number of advertisers who are willing to pay a large amount to reach that very narrow audience. And everyone in the middle is kind of left out in the cold. For about 7 years at O'Reilly, we really took that advertising model to heart and really tried to do that, where we would pay. We commissioned writers to write high-quality articles for us on a variety of topics. We had microsites on nearly every computer language that was out there, and had a team selling ads, and later had some additional agencies working on it. After 5, 6, 7 years of doing it and really not seeing the kind of success we were hoping to see, given what was happening around the industry, doing some real homework and some real hard look at the numbers and the math, it really turned out that only 2 or 3% of those articles that we paid people to write and that we'd spent a lot of time making sure were useful and discoverable and well categorized, very, very few of them were actually making back what we'd spent for them in advertising. And at that point, what we did is we made a strategic decision that our website wasn't about attracting eyeballs to sell advertising. It was about attracting visitors and offering them products and services that we were selling ourselves, and really focusing on, in some ways that's advertising for ourselves, but it's really treating it fundamentally as an e-commerce site, and that's how we were going to make our money, not by attracting people with articles on the latest technology change and selling ads around that, but attracting them with useful content and then selling them things like books and conferences and videos. The economics of online advertising, again, suggests that you need to have a very significant scale or a very, very valuable audience in order to make a successful business, and there's not really a lot of those to go around.
Okay, are there any more questions here from the audience? We have one more from the audience here.
With the growth of books, does that mean talk about the fiction author? Do you expect to open up their class house?
Okay, so the question is with open source for fiction, will the authors open up the story for feedback from the audience? Is that the question? Or from the fans? So I guess maybe you can talk about fiction in the role of ebooks and the new medium. I guess that's the question. I'm not sure I understand it, but that's how I rephrased it anyway. I think I got it right.
When you talk about designing the web, you can let go of the story path. So if you're going to write a book, it's going to be like writing fiction. Would it be an electronic version versus a textbook where the audience gives a negative version of
Oh, like voting on a happy ending or a sad ending or something like that. You want to talk? I guess you want to talk about fiction and some of that kind of feedback, Andrew. Does that help out?
Sure. No, that does help. I have seen people starting to experiment with that sort of thing. I think it's clear from the people who have tried it that you really can't effectively crowdsource a cohesive narrative. That sort of form of storytelling doesn't really lend itself to a large number of collaborators or contributors. That said, I think there are very, very interesting things happening that are no less of storytelling than a novel is, or that sort of standard fiction is. But are things that we're probably unlikely to ever label as an interactive book or as some other thing like that. I mean, you see things like alternative reality gaming, and certainly a lot of things that are happening with mobile applications where people are again, especially in the gaming world, where people are using these environments to build real narratives and to establish a story arc and create a very immersive environment that has a lot of that sort of flexibility about where things go. But those probably aren't things that are likely to necessarily evolve from or ever really resemble what we would call a book or a novel now. That said, I think the fact that someone who is crafting a textual narrative, sort of what they would see as a standard kind of novel, can do that at a time and in the context of a network where they can use tools like Twitter, and they can know that people are going to be experiencing and interacting with this material on devices and through systems that are connected to everyone else. I think it opens up a lot of opportunities, and I certainly don't claim to be the kind of person who's creative enough to dream up interesting and imaginative ways to do that. But this is definitely a time for extensive and interesting experimentation, and I expect we'll see that just as much on the fiction side of things as we do in other genres.
Did that answer your question? Okay. Bill, would you like to ask your question? Because I know that you read constantly.
Where do you see the future of printed books? I've heard one person predict the end of the printed book market about 2012 as e-books take away the economy of scale of printing books. And has anybody ever figured out a way to get an author-signed edition of an e-book?
Did you hear
Sure. That's a very good question. I certainly don't personally believe that we're going to see the demise of the printed book. I think there are large categories of publishing that will be done primarily in digital form. You think about the kind of experience you have when you go through an airport and you pick up a novel to entertain you for a 6-hour flight. That kind of consumption, especially on the sort of mass market side of things, is clearly more efficient to do that electronically, and I see that happening much quicker than maybe people really expect. The kind of material, the kind of books that you might donate or give to a friend when you're done, but are really disposable entertainment. At the same time, I think this opens up an opportunity. Once you sort of take away that category of publishing, out of the picture, what you're left with is the opportunity to do things that are of much higher quality and are much more interesting and much more beautiful. And for those people who value objects and who want the artifact, the souvenir, the gift, then you have some real opportunities to do things that can really stand out. I mean, you think about as new formats of distribution and new ways of doing things emerge, they very, very rarely completely eliminate the old. I mean, there were more horses used in World War II than any previous war. And certainly, we've had light bulbs for well over a century, and the candle business is still a multi-billion-dollar business. But candles for most people are not sold and used for utility. They're decoration, they're adornment, they're again objects for the sake of object rather than the utility of lighting a room. So I think a lot of that is likely to happen. And I certainly expect to see digital printing and print on demand be a pretty important and growing factor for a lot of types of publishing and retailing. And again, I don't subscribe to the belief that the printed book is going anywhere, though certainly for a large set of publishing and a lot of types of content, more people will consume those things electronically than in print fairly soon.
All right. Comment from the audience is Sony's still making turntables. Okay. Any more? I can think of one or two more questions, and we do have one more here from the audience. I imagine, how's your stamina holding up, Andrew?
I'd be happy to take two more questions, and then unfortunately I'm going to have to say goodnight.
All right. Go ahead, Carolyn.
Do you have an example of a publication that you do think hit the mark that's an example of high style and design?
Did you hear the question okay?
In terms of what type of publication? So were we to print or electronic or what are we?
In an e-book, like somebody mentioned Wired, and you said they missed the mark, and the Science magazine missed the mark. Who's doing it right?
That's a very good question, and I would say one great example of someone who's doing it right. Now, I can think of a couple, but there is an app that's available on the iPad and the iPhone called Epicurious, and it's a cooking application. It's really a reimagining of the cookbook. What is that like in the context of a device like this? And one of the things is giving you that the fact that a cookbook really is, again, sort of a printed expression of a database of information with recipes and ingredients. And that particular one allows you to look at and find recipes and ingredients along many different dimensions that would realistically be possible in a printed form. And then assemble a shopping list and email that to yourself for use later. I would say that the Elements app from the CTO of Wolfram is a fantastic example of someone using the characteristics of the device to present information that actually is also available as a book and was originally done as a book, but just really taking advantage of what this platform has to offer and what the capabilities of the device are. I mean, those are two that really spring to mind. Another one I'd like to point to, and there's a couple of these in the birding category. So there's one called Bird's Eye, another set of them called iBird, and these are really reimagining the birding field guide to take advantage of the fact that this is a device that lets you can hear the call of the bird. You can filter by different region about it knows where you are, so it knows that what set of the birds are likely to be in the region where you are, and it does so in an interface that's really intended to help someone using the app enjoy what their hobby is. So those are a few that come to mind. I'm sure there are many more, but I haven't quite looked at all of the 250,000 apps that are out there just yet.
I can show the Epicurious and the iBird apps after the meeting if anyone wants to. Yeah,
and the Elements one is, I can't say enough about that one. That's really just an extraordinary experience.
Okay, so I'm going to ask the last question. And I've been, looking forward to this program since January when Marcy Hendon and I really brainstormed it. And now that, we've we've reached it, our ending, and that we have, I'm kind of sad. So I guess I would like to know for what will be the sequel for Publishing Without Boundaries, and can we do something on that in 2011?
That's a great question, Spike. Believe me, if I knew what was on the horizon for 2011, I would sleep a lot better at night. I think we're going to continue to see this relentless march toward mobile delivery and consumption of a variety of media. I heard once someone refer to the iPhone as a device eater, in that it has continued to sort of devour things that we used to have as separate devices or software or tools, be it the alarm clock or the GPS, the telephone, of course, the digital camera, the video camera, the sort of flip camera thing. More recently, I was hearing about you can buy a cable for I think it's maybe $99. You can buy a cable and then download a free app and plug your iPhone into your car, and it will tell you what that check engine light means and give you real-time information about your fuel economy and other diagnostic information, things that used to require multiple devices and typically a trip to the mechanics. And of course, you can go to the Apple Store right now and see a device for plugging your iPhone to be able to accept credit cards. This transition and this change and what's being enabled, the iPhone is, of course, the flagship example, but Google is activating 100,000 Android phones a day, and it's not just about Apple. This is sort of fundamentally altering the way that we connect with each other and to information. It is just an extraordinary time to be in the business of understanding technology and in the business of sharing information and knowledge. I'm always happy to do this kind of thing, and I can only imagine the kind of interesting things that will be happening in 2011 that we can talk about, Spike.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Andrew. We're really grateful for you to present to the Cleveland Digital Publishing Users Group. We're very happy that you did that. Thank you very much.
Thank you. My pleasure.
And you guys, thank you. It's Catherine here. I don't know if you guys are hearing me with the terrible echo or whatever, but I just want to thank everyone who is here today for putting up with our technical glitches and seeing us through, and the great questions. Thanks especially to Spike and the Cleveland Digital Publishing Users Group and Marcy for making this happen, and Andrew for your great talk and questions. So thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Good night.
Bye.